CMV Robin Hood is not a socialist icon. In fact, he seems to be the opposite. I see people use Robin Hood as an example of socialism in myth due to the steals from the rich, gives to the poor saying. But this, in my view, is an extremely shallow interpretation. The most popular version of the myth goes like this: Robin Hood was a loyalist of King Richard and a nobleman who volunteered to fight in the Crusades. When he returned, he found that Prince John had replaced Richard in his absence, and was taxing the Britons into poverty. Robin then became an outlaw to resist the new regime and stole the tax money from law officers to return it to the impoverished taxpayers. He does not steal from just any rich person. This is the myth that was adapted to just about every film about Robin Hood, from Disney to Russell Crowe. In this version at least, Robin Hood seems to be more small government libertarian than socialist due to his support of the monarchy. He could even be said to be right-wing authoritarian. The earliest known version of Robin Hood is also very dissimilar to a socialist in those stories. He did not steal from the rich nor give to the poor. He stole from almost anyone and kept the money for himself, though usually he'd target those who were dishonest or loyal to the Vatican. And while he had no love for the Pope, he was deeply religious. There are no stories at all in which Robin Hood advocated for things like unionization, ending social or economic hierarchies, maligning private enterprise, etc. In my view, there's no indication at all that Robin Hood is an example of a socialist other than that he was generally nicer to poor people than to rich people, which in my view is much too vague for a connection to be made to socialism. I don't think libertarianism nor socialism are the full reading. I would say fighting for justice and against tyranny are more apt descriptions of the story. In this sense, it can be taken by any mainstream political entity as they all promote or claim to promote both as ends. There are no stories at all in which Robin Hood advocated for things like unionization, ending social or economic hierarchies. Coming to Netflix this fall. Isn't his lore much like King Arthur's famously inconsistent We Know Certain Beats? Enemies of Sheriff of Nottingham, band of merry men, skilled archer and thief, but other elements usually change. So can we agree on the official version? I mean, even pre-Disney you acknowledge the stealing from the rich version is the one that connected most with people. Presumably with any ideology and worldview, socialism was inspired by people who had ideas that would become part of larger whole instead of the full-formed idea of socialism. Would Robin Hood be any different given he doesn't meet the full criteria? Robin Hood predates capitalism by 4 centuries, so he is not a capitalist or a critic of capitalism. So if you want to be technical about it, then saying that he is a libertarian capitalist is equally as stupid as saying he is a socialist. Robin Hood himself wasn't a socialist, but I get why he'd be an icon to socialists. He was a rebel against the established order and cared more about the well-being of the people than the rules of the feudalist system he lived in. I'm not a socialist, but it's not hard to see why he'd be an icon to someone who sees the rich and powerful of today as not fundamentally different from the feudal lords of the past. In the stories I'm most familiar with, while he was no Marxist, he was a gadfly for the monarchy and supported what was essentially a commune of outlaws in the forests around Nottingham. It would be anachronistic to apply modern concepts like unions to him. But his aim was certainly in the direction of taking from the rich and bringing it back to the poor, mostly in the form of the king's venison. The primary way that the rich extracted wealth from the poor in Robin Hood's time was taxes. The primary way they do so now is exploiting labor and rents. Obviously, Robin Hood was not a socialist. He existed before socialism. When people draw analogies to socialism, what they mean is that he is known for standing up for the downtrodden, fighting for their access to land that should be public commons and for their access to the means of life and comfort. All I've ever heard about Robin Hood is stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Sounds pretty socialist to me. If that is the version that people, then that is who Robin Hood is. Robin Hood is a mythical figure, so whatever version of the myth people know is the correct one. Redistributing the wealth. End of story. That's not libertarian. It's almost as if telling stories that explicitly advocated seizing the means of production and overthrowing the monarchy could have gotten people killed. So instead, people had to express these sentiments obliquely. You can't take these stories entirely at face value. How is a monarchy alt-right? Robin was invented before Marx could pee his diaper. TBH, I have never been able to come to a conclusion about Robin Hood's work. Many say he returned the money to poorer. Many say he kept it for himself. He is called a hero in children books, but at the end it always seems like he is fulfilling his own desires of doing whatever the fuck he wants without any consequences. No bro. The most popular version is the Disney one where he legit steals from the greedy king to help his countrymen. It's the one most people remember when they think of Robin Hood. I think it's a massive stretch to try and contextualize Robin Hood as socialist or capitalist. Fundamentally, trying to impose socialist or capitalist views on high medieval economies and actors is a fool's errand. Can't very well call a devoted monarchist a small government libertarian though. Dumb take. You're reading way too much into this, and making absurd conclusions based on semantics. That's the thing about myths. They evolve. Doesn't matter where the Robin Hood myth started. All that matters is that now it is a story about stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. He probably wasn't a talking fox either. But that didn't stop Disney. Fictional characters can be whatever we want them to be. Small government libertarian then socialist. He could even be said to be right-wing authoritarian. These two are very contradictory. It shows that Robin Hood is just so much a political partisan figure than a social justice warrior. I think there's a pretty clear the Robin Hood in the original stories and the Robin Hood that exists in the public consciousness, the latter of which is certainly somewhat of a socialist icon. Let's not forget that Robin Hood is a fictional character and based on how the character is written. In every rendition, the appeal can be to different sections. Because the original was not a socialist icon doesn't mean he cannot be a socialist icon in any rendition made after. Also, as mentioned by others, the economic concepts of socialism and capitalism came after Robin Hood. So there is no way he would fit exactly in either of the boxes we define today. Different times, different views. Measure not what he holds as virtues but on what he does with it. You might be right, but I think you are skirting around the fundamental that which underpins the story of Robin Hood. And that is he steals from the rich and gives to the poor. How is that not similar to socialist ideology? Libertarianism is anti-government as a rule. So unless he was specifically anti-government and anti-taxes, that doesn't fit. If he was a loyalist of King Richard and fought in the Crusades and only did this stuff when he was replaced, it stands to reason that he just doesn't like the new government. Now I like Robin Hood even more. Also, being a monarchist doesn't make anyone a right authoritarian. I'm a monarchist. I support constitutional monarchy such as in the UK, Canada, Japan, Norway, etc., but I'm on lib left on the political compass.